The cyberculture of the 1990s is indeed a weird fusion of countercultural idealism and high-tech affordances. But it's anchored in something a little bit older, and that's where I think the coherence comes from. Both the counterculture of the 1960s and the tech world of the 1990s have their roots in the tech world of the 1950s, the 1940s and 50s, and especially cybernetics. And in that world, there was a vision that the world itself, organic world, material world, was all information, really. And what you needed was an information technology to make that system visible. And once you understood that that system was an information system, then you needed to learn to act in it as an information agent yourself. That fantasy survives right through the 60s, into the 90s, even into our own day, because it's a fantasy in which, through new technologies, we will escape politics. We will be free, in a libertarian sense, to be fully ourselves, but we will also be, quote, free in a political sense, free from political institutions. And that's something that people on the right, people in the neoliberal world very much want. And so what holds those two ideas in place together is the cybernetic dream of a world of constantly circulating information managed by constantly available information technologies.
First, I would say that we don't have to say ideology like it was first a singular thing, and second that it was the same thing that the ideologies in Europe. Because to me, and it took me some time for figuring out, but to me, ideology in Silicon Valley are like tools, and tools are the real ideology. I will give you some example of that. In Europe, we have communism, we have socialism, we have libertarianism as well, liberal parties, we have conservatism, all of that. And usually we have intellectuals who try to collaborate with some political parties for getting a takeover of the power. It's quite different in Silicon Valley, where when you look at, let's say, techno-libertarism, long-termism, dark enlightenment, usually it's very small communities through internet, talking to each other, doing some iteration, and using ideological tools coming from different places. And usually it comes from UK, Oxford, particularly Warwick. It could come from Russia as well, like Cosmism. And it's interesting point from sociology of intellectuals, but also interesting from technological field, because the real question is why they do that, what is their use and interest in that kind of tools. And I mean ideology and also metaphors. I've been really struck by, of course, Fred books, but also how he explained like Barlow, as one the co-founder of the Electronic Foundation, tried to use his organization for do some lobby to political institutions, but also to vehicle some metaphors. And I think the ideological question in Silicon Valley is really related to that tradition.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think you said something I really want to highlight, which is that ideology is a toolkit for people in Silicon Valley, and tools are the ideology. That dual mindset is really powerful. One kind of actor who I've always found fascinating is the Barlow or the Brand. These are people who run, metaphor shops, places where metaphors can be developed and turned into resources for people to use tactically in their professional lives. I find that completely fascinating. And you've pointed to a number of kind of contemporary, right-wing spaces, neo-reactionary spaces, porting in ideas from Warwick and other places. And I'm curious whether you see those as metaphor shops or as something different. I think what I want to ask is, with something like longevity, or are those folks sort of sincerely seeking to improve themselves? Are they being tactical? Is it both? How do we think about the relationship between the sort of tactical use of tools and the focus on individual life?
To me, the very specific thing with Silicon Valley is that every people living there coming from a different place. So they came with a kind of social nostalgia. I think it's a very clear but hiding fact that actually they try to reconnect with something. But they do it in a world without institutions. Yeah. If you try to do that in London, Paris, New York, you have all these institutions who are trying to control what you say, what you do, what you're trying to build. But it's not the case. It wasn't the case, at least in Silicon Valley. Yeah. And so actually, I think they are splitted or navigating between these two nostalgia.
Right.
The first one is social, and the second one is metaphysic. It
Yeah,
means that using their surroundings for building up some, I would say, religion will be like too easy word, but at least a kind of spirituality.
Right.
And when you look at Elon Musk today, it's exactly the same thing. He has this kind of nostalgia for a previous world, a social world. People we're going to be to its connection, but also he's trying to build up like a new utopia, a new metaphysic world, and it name it Mars, but it could be a different thing.
I think it signals the end of the Californian ideology and of the mode of digital expansion that subtended it. The Californian ideology was an ideology of connectionism, born out of cybernetics, celebrated in a counterculture devoted to turning away from bureaucracy, hierarchy, the Vietnam War, and hoping to build a world where people could simply organize themselves on the basis of felt connection. That's a perfect way of thinking about, machines when you need to build a global network. It says, look, we're building the network. The counterculture failed, but we're building the network. We're building the Macintosh. The Macintosh will keep us from being Orwell's 1984. We're building the internet. The internet will be a free space of speech and disembodied love and affection. What I think changed was that starting in the mid-90s and really accelerating in the early 2000s, it became very clear that these networked technologies, as they got into place, generated data of great value. And it became clear that we could mine that data, turn that data into patterns, and resell the patterns. And so as that became clear, the value proposition ceased to be connect everything and see what happens, and started to be mine everything and see what you can make, money, see how much money you can make. So we get social media, we get later AI, we get cryptocurrency. All of these require really different resources. The internet always required energy, always required cooling. But what's happening now with AI, cryptocurrency, and to some extent social media, Meta in particular, is we have these very large server farms that require a great deal of land, they require a great deal of energy, they require a great deal of cooling power, whether from electricity or from water. They require states that can support that, the states that have deregulated infrastructures, pro-business infrastructures, pro-business politicians who will support that. In that world, an ideology born in a place devoted to extraction, Texas, that sustains certain kinds of leaders in power, Texas politicians, Texas religious leaders, is enormously valuable. It legitimates the turn toward extraction, and it even as Texas itself provides a new landscape into which tech firms are moving to do the extractive work. But I think that the Texas ideology fuses digital extraction to a different part of America than the California ideology did. The California ideology fused connectionism to California and its long habit of spirituality. The Texas ideology fuses extractivism to Texas, to the legacy of slavery, to the legacy of cattle ranching, to the legacy of oil, and to the legacy of the promotion of Christian nationalism and of leaders, politicians, presidents who will at least not get in the way of and sometimes even celebrate those ideals. And as Texas goes national, particularly through Washington, D.C., we see extractivist ideology, deregulated politics, and Christian nationalism fusing under the umbrella of Trump.
Actually, 2024 have been a terrible year for Silicon Valley and in Silicon Valley. I mean, I've never seen that, even documented. It has been terrible. It has been like a big fight. And today, people seem to think that everybody in Silicon Valley is about Trump and technofascism.
No, which is not
Actually,
true.
I do think there is still the Californian ideology. For instance, my interviewee was on Larry Ellison Island in Hawaii last week, and they do like meditation. They were trying to connect each other. Taking whatever they want to take during the night. There is still that. What I see is that we are clearly divided between what I will call a blue tech and a red tech. What Fred is dealing about, to me, is like an evolution of this industry, but it's also a tradition. And there is an opposition between the software industry mentality, culture, which is all about magic, and there is the other part of the industry, which is more into infrastructure and material things. This is why we have this kind of, today, fight between I would say San Francisco and Austin or Dallas and Texas, because one part of the industry, especially crypto guys, Bitcoin guys, AI guys, data center guys, they try to use Donald Trump and the government for their own agenda, but that doesn't need to say that the opposite camp is dead, and I think we will see that through time. And I have a special thought for what I call tech witches, which is I say that I mean in a positive sense and meaning of the word. I think about Meredith Whittaker, Kate Crawford, Dana Boyd, Tim Gebru, who have been part of tech. In the tech industry is trying to organize the resistance today and develop a more feminist, human-centric tech, which is, tech is still a political field and a warfare field.
Yeah, totally agree with that. The tech is still a political field. I love the idea of the tech witches. I think they would celebrate that as well. I want to distinguish, just inside the Californian ideology, between the kind of local uses of California spiritualism to create the fantasy of interconnection and the interconnected world in the local California setting, which I think is very real and very persistent. Catherine Chen's book on religion has been really good on that. I want to distinguish that from the use of those practices and ideas as techniques for marketing machines and justifying build-outs. I think that I have a collection of advertisements from the 1990s at my office, and Dell Computers holds up a laptop and says "Utopia." I don't think anyone can do that anymore. I think the other thing that I would note, I think is different, is that digital technologies are being dramatically integrated into traditionally industrially manufactured technologies. I think the automobile, the electric car is the obvious example, but there are many others. And as that happens, it becomes harder to cling to the notion that you are building a separate space that sort of floats above. And those are two subtle changes, but I would absolutely agree that the California ideology within Silicon Valley is still a powerful social organizer.
For instance, if you look at what people vote in the companies, you have like Netflix, Google, Apple, it's like 90% high for Democrats. And the opposite you have, and it has been the case for a long time, HP, Intel, people, the old engineers who have definitely more Republican and conservative mentality and mindset.
I think the distinction between hardware and software cultures is really important, and nobody ever no one's articulated that quite as well, and it's great. I think that's terrific. I think one thing that has surprised me, knowing that Silicon Valley is predominantly a progressive Democrat environment, was the moment after Trump got elected, the first month or so or 6 weeks. And my colleague Jeremy Bailenson, who I think a lot of, he's a virtual reality scholar, he went to a meeting of venture capitalists. He said, Fred, it's like they were all suddenly saying, well, Donald Trump, maybe he's not so bad. And I do think that there's this kind of subtle, it's a little bit like everyone turns toward the sun or the sun king. They know, the sun is coming from there, and we all kind of turn toward it. And we mouth things that we may not believe, but we still mouth them.
Yeah. Actually, I'm sorry, but I will have to add something about that because I think it's really important, and especially what COVID did to this industry and how it polarized people in tech, within tech, but also against the Democrat Party and Joe Biden administration.
That's interesting, yeah.
And from different perspectives, they were super pissed off about the shutdown. They were extremely pissed off about the regulation, especially on AI. And part of the New Coalition and the fact that big personalities like Mark Anderson and Ben Horowitz have joined the camp of Trump is related to that part of the story.
Great point. Yeah. The first part is we have to remember that Silicon Valley depicts itself as a place against the government and against the state, even as it depends on government resources. The internet is a government-funded project. The technologies that evolved in Silicon Valley evolved there because there had been government-funded military research before and radio research in the 1920s. So Silicon Valley is both very government-dependent, and constantly proclaiming its independence, a little bit like a toddler. Mommy, I'm running away. Okay, so that's one piece. So in the contemporary environment, I think what we see, setting aside the politics for a moment, we see the traditional work of the military-industrial complex, tech firms working to get military contracts, working to get regulatory environments that they want, being very practical about it. However, we don't have an ordinary administration. But I would characterize it as fascist in the most traditional sense. It's an American version, it's a Christian nationalist version, but it is a fundamentally fascist regime. In that context, when Palantir or Google serve the regime, when Palantir takes a contract to build a universal database for all American citizens, they have crossed a line from military-industrial research on behalf of the nation to research on behalf of an authoritarian leader, personally, specifically, in ways that amplify that leader's fascist power. I think we've entered a new era that some have called technofascism. I'm willing to stand behind that label, though I recognize that it's a provocative and sometimes misleading label. I think it's the best one we've got right now.
I mean, actually, the whole history of tech balance between peace and war. Yeah. And I think we started a new cycle. It could explain our current situation in the US. The comment that I have to do about technofascism is fascist is, rooted into anger coming with war, of the first war, with very important, what we call in French, francs-tireurs, people who have been on the front, who are anciens combattants, who are trying to do something where their skills and their anger in society. I not necessarily see the same thing today in the US, but still war and war mentality and warfare mentality and the military complex has a strong influence again, because actually it was at the early beginning of the history of Silicon Valley, it was exactly the same thing. I think we have to connect the dots between these different kind of part of the coalition. And even in tech, actually, if you look at the current administration, I would say there are at least three currents, and I call them tech Afrikaners, the tech patriots, and the indie tech.
The rise of Trump, and who I would argue is fascist, what I see actually is the legacy of warfare, but it's 2 generations back. It's the Vietnam War. And I see a working class that went to fight that war and returned to see their jobs going overseas, and college-educated people who had not fought the war taking their place in the workforce. And I think that's one of the taproots of the rage that we feel. The other thing to note is just that in my view, the political, cultural side of fascism, the rise of the right and the rise of platform technologies, social media, AI, and cryptocurrency happen in the same time frame, but not together. What we're seeing now is a coming together of 2 things that have been streaming for a while.
And I think a very important point, which is maybe forgotten sometimes, is that these guys today in the Trump administration our worst enemy is the Bush administration. Conservative people who have done wars like in the Middle East and Afghanistan. And so to me it's the epitome of a new mentality, and the mentality is not to take the power, is to make an exit from political.
Oh, that's interesting.
sphere.
Yeah, interesting.
It's exactly the agenda of Peter Thiel.
Yeah.
And it has been the case for 14 years now.
Right, sure.
In our work, the difficult thing is to get together the ideology part and the economic and social part. And it's very difficult to do, and we're struggling to do that since Karl Marx. So it's really something difficult. And I guess that Silicon Valley ideology or just Silicon Valley companies are not cool anymore. I mean, people don't dream anymore about them. Young people, I think there are more and more cynicism about that. They want to go there to just have a high salary. It's not anymore about making revolution. I don't believe into that. In the meantime, our economic and social institutions have been more and more Silicon Valley type, which means create entrepreneurship everywhere, try to eradicate institutions and all solidarity mechanism. This is why we have to take care in our jobs, in journalism, in all factory world to fight back and to preserve this old solidarity system, because Europe know pretty better than every other continent how and why it's important, and how undone that could go, back us there, the worst hour of history.
Yeah, I agree with everything you said, and I would just extend on the question of what happens when the Californian ideology goes overseas. I think parts of it have gone overseas. You know, I've met with a number of French officials on this trip, and many of them are very afraid that AI is in fact a kind of general intelligence and will wipe out labor. And that idea that AI is a general intelligence, that it somehow floats above machine life and the natural world, that's Californian ideology in action. If you follow that idea, if you believe that idea, then you can get trapped, as I think some French leaders are, in the notion that, oh, we have to race, we can't fall behind, we have to stay with it. And next thing you know, you're running a race on Silicon Valley's road. And that's a risk, I think. So one of the things that does happen is the ideology travels, it makes leaders in other countries anxious, and it orients them toward following Silicon Valley's agenda without knowing it. I don't think that's a great effect.
In a nutshell, and it's a way to illustrate what I was saying at the beginning, AI is the ideology.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
AI
great. Yeah, I like
the ideology.
Yeah, that's great. I like that.
And we have to keep that in mind for being efficient and try to keep going on, about European projects and how and why France is so particular, especially in the American eye.
Yeah, great.
Sciences Po.